Hi, Sue. Thanks for taking the time out. It's always wonderful talking to you. Welcome to this session on specifically playbooks. I know you and I have been discussing playbooks for a bit now. So just wanted to bounce off some thoughts and get your ideas around the playbooks themselves. I know you and Success Chain does a lot of work around playbooks with your customer base. So I'm looking forward to this, short conversation with you.
Likewise, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Prithwi, and well done on all the work you've been doing around the playbooks. It's great.
Thank you, Sue. To start off with, let's just reiterate in your head and your experience, what value does a playbook bring to the table?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in theory, a playbook should help to structure what you're doing as a CSM, particularly from an operational point of view. The playbook is there to try and, I would take some of the pressure away from what a CSM is doing on a daily basis, because we're doing so many different things, and our attention span is pulled all over the place. And I think with a playbook in place, it helps CSM to remain zen and just gives them the right guidelines of what they should be doing step after step. I think a playbook, it's great to give those guidelines, but because in CS, we're always having exceptions, we're always having different contexts with the customers. So I think there should be a certain amount of flexibility for the customer success managers to know how in certain situations they can be more flexible with the different steps, the different tasks, the guidelines. So, you need to have that discernment sometimes and not just be applying it black and white,
Right. Absolutely.
Yes.
So, walk us through a little bit when you go about designing a playbook from scratch. What is the typical thinking behind it, and how do you, sort of break it down into some macro steps as you go about designing a playbook of your own?
Yes, it's a great question. It's not an easy answer because I think that there are so many different steps that you could take depending on the different situations. So usually, what we try to do is first of all start with the outcome, being very customer success centered. So what is the outcome we want to do after this playbook has been run through? And then just think about what are the pragmatic, logical steps which will get us from A to B, and that B being the outcome. So think about it. If you talk about an onboarding playbook, for example, there are so many different things that you could do for onboarding. Mm-hmm. And obviously from one definition of onboarding at a certain company, this could be a different definition for another company.
Right.
So those different steps to do an onboarding playbook could be completely different from one company to the next. So I think what is important to try and do is just to say, okay, what are the common steps which are applicable to most companies, and put those in the playbook. And that's where I think it's important to come back to what I was talking about, which is the flexibility, is to have the flexibility so those playbooks can probably have additional steps which are contextualized to each specific context. Yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. And, I'll add on there a little bit. We have deployed a fair bit of playbooks ourselves. And I think very similar to what you do, but from a tech platform standpoint, the way we go about doing this, again, very similar to what your approach is, Sue, is one, obviously the outcome is critical because what are you designing for? But then it becomes very important for us to crystallize it down into, what are the basic common minimum steps which you need and you feel you need to achieve that outcome. And these are the common basic steps. Like you said, there may be flexibility required for certain different scenarios and stuff like that. But 80% of the time, what are the basic steps you need?
Yes.
And once you identify those, and so this becomes sort of the spine of the playbook, if you will.
Yes.
And then you now need to figure out who are the individuals and the roles which will, do these 5 steps. There may be 5 different roles. It may be the same role. Again, depends from organization to organization, process to process, outcome to outcome. But so you're now attaching the role to those activities or tasks. And some of these tasks may also be automated. And then, so that this really becomes the outcome, then the steps. So you've got 2 major components. And the third component for us becomes, what is going to trigger this playbook? What is the initiation point for this playbook? So that really becomes a data sort of identification. Yeah. So for onboarding, is it account closure? And what details do you need to kickstart this playbook effectively? And, for renewal, it is renewal date and so on and so forth. So these 3 blocks, I think, for us, once we get a sense, becomes fairly easy then to deploy a playbook. And then the 4th component is really optimizing it over time and seeing if it's really meeting the outcome. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. Yes. And then going ahead and tweaking it and optimizing it. I mean, that's all there is to it, end of day.
Yeah. Now, you've done a great job. And it's not easy, is it? Because, you can think about, okay, what are the steps? What is the right chronological order for those steps as well? And then thinking, what you mentioned, which are the triggers, right? Thinking and anticipating all that, orchestrating that. And I think when you put playbooks into place, obviously it's very useful to help organize and prioritize what the CSM is doing. But I think you also have to remain very agile. Yes. Because, as your processes are constantly evolving, then you have to revisit your playbooks as well. Because if you have processes which are updating and then your playbooks are outdated, right? So the triggers is just going to go haywire, isn't it? So
absolutely. And like you said, there are obviously more nuances to that. Because the concept of the playbook does not really exist in the way we feel it needs to be for it to be operationalized in either a task management system or a ticket management system or a project management system or the CRM itself with this amount of flexibility. And there are certain nuances. So like you mentioned, all the tasks may not have the same weightage. So when you're looking at tracking the playbook, the last task may have the maximum weightage. You've completed everything else. It's still not 90% done.
Yes.
It's still 50% done if the last task itself is of 50% weightage. So there are those nuances, obviously. But I think the main aspects of the playbook design, I think we have covered fairly well. Yes,
it's great. And I think it's very useful. I think it's something, certainly from a customer success platform point of view, it's obviously a great advantage to have those playbooks. And so that, the CSM gets up in the morning, okay, what do I need to do today? And all the data has triggered everything, prioritized everything. So it's a way of keeping zen, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. One question I'll definitely ask you, you have a lot of experience in this space. What common mistakes have you seen being made as organizations go about implementing playbooks?
I think it's not necessarily a mistake in the way the playbooks are organized and put into place. But I think one of the things is just to probably have an expectation of how the playbooks are exploited. So I think, if you're in an organization where you say, right, this is the 3rd step of this playbook for my onboarding, and I must absolutely abide by this 3rd step because it's in the playbook, because it's the Bible, if you like. Then in certain cases, you must use your own discernment to know that, perhaps for whatever reason, with that particular customer, maybe you need to do an intermediate step before you do that 3rd step, which is in the playbook, right? And I think that comes with experience. It comes with, probably the way you're feeling the relationship is going with the customer, probably something that about the customer, which is not written in the playbook. So you have to have that. That's where I think the added value comes in for for a CSM, because they know the customer inside out. So I think that's probably the first mistake. Don't be too strict. Don't be too rigid around the, let's say, the exploitation of playbooks.
Right.
From a more technical point of view, I think probably the other mistake is, putting it into place, and it's a bit like putting a health score into place.
Yeah.
Where you haven't anticipated all the data which is needed to make those triggers. And so I think that's obviously quite a difficult challenge to make sure that, you're triggering the right data at the right time with those playbooks. Right. And if something is not pertinently done, then, that could drive towards actions which are being taken place by the CSM when it's probably not the right time.
Correct.
So that can be quite risky, I think, if you're not making sure that you're doing the right things in the right order. So it could be quite risky from the perception of the customer. So I think that's another challenge.
Right.
And I think the other challenge, which is related to that, is making sure that you have the right data available. So, before you can start putting playbooks into place with the triggers, you need to make sure that data is available.
Right.
So that's the prerequisite, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What about you? Have you seen other challenges as well, Prithwi?
Yeah, well, I think two come to mind very quickly. One is, I think, at times organizations overcomplicate the playbook.
Yes.
I think if you ask me, if there are more than 10, 12 steps in a playbook, you probably need multiple playbooks.
Yes.
A 25, 30 step playbook is probably not a good idea. And I see that all the time because it's the easier thing to do. Cram everything into one playbook and let's be done with it. But that's probably not what's going to get you the outcome. It might be better to break that up into 3 playbooks of, 10 steps each, if it is a 30 step overall playbook. You will track better. The CSM doesn't get overloaded with, hundreds and thousands of tasks now coming their way, driven through the playbook and stuff like that. So
I think you're right. And just, if I wake up in the morning and I see my playbook with 12 tasks, I think, oh my God, I'm going to go back to bed, I think. So
yeah, and if it gets triggered for multiple accounts together, it's just multiplies very exponentially that way. So I think that's important to keep in mind when you're designing it. That is it easy to monitor? Is it easy to actually execute on? Will it even get adopted? So that's one. The other, I think, and this is less of a mistake, it's more of an oversight. I think organizations tend to sort of underplay the different roles who can actually participate in a playbook.
Yes.
It's very easy to make it extensible and not dump everything on the CS team, because just the CS team, as we all are aware, cannot get you that outcome. So you do need certain roles to come in. At times you might need finance to participate for it may not be for majority of the tasks, but it may be for 1, 2, 3 tasks. You may need product teams to participate. You may need your solutions engineer to participate, your training manager to participate, etc., etc. You may need your executives to participate. So I think it's good to set the culture of consistent, scalable, playbook-driven organization if you have more roles participating, I think, in the playbook.
Yeah. I love that as well. And I think you're right, that is underestimated. And I think it probably reinforces, what is often a challenge where the customer success department becomes a Swiss knife of doing everything. Yeah. So I think, to stress what you're talking about, I think is probably a good idea before you actually draw up the playbook with the different roles and responsibilities. You could even use the RACI matrix.
Yeah.
Right. Because each playbook is comprised of different tasks.
Yes.
So within each task, we say, right, we're doing onboarding, and for the onboarding, we have part of the onboarding is a handover between sales and customer success. Then you could do a RACI matrix.
Yes, absolutely.
For this particular task. And obviously the main players would be sales and customer success, but you could have other people who are contributors to the handover. Yeah. So that you can reflect in the playbook and not just put everything under the responsibility of customer success, right?
Correct. And it's also a way, and I was talking about this with a head of customer success recently. It's also a way for the head of customer success or the VP customer success or the chief customer officer to actually drive accountability into other functions and roles also, and not be the one who's always questioned. I'm saying, okay,
yes,
here is a finance I'm waiting for, and this task is stuck there, and there are n number of playbooks, and so now let's go fix that. Here is where I'm waiting for sales, here is where I'm waiting for marketing, so on and so forth. In fact, you mentioned onboarding. I think a very common use case we see is the onboarding, including the customer side roles as well, because at times you need accountability there. You mentioned the RACI matrix. The RACI matrix includes the customer on onboarding specifically. So how do you drive that? Portal is okay, but you actually need to drive tasks. The customer should receive tasks on their inbox like your team does. And now you are at even Stevens, and it's fine if there is a delay at their end, that's okay, but it's at least on record.
Yes, absolutely. I mean that's a great example there, Prithwi, because I think a lot of the time when we're trying to design a wonderful onboarding process with all the associated playbooks, because we have several playbooks for onboarding. It's not just one playbook, it could be several components. But one of the main components, which is often overlooked, is, okay, what is the responsibility for the customer to also help themselves to be correctly onboarded? And I think there are lots of prerequisites, and we often talk about a mutual success plan as being part of that onboarding process. And I think we need to set expectations up right up front with the customer, so that they understand that they're also going to be having an active part in the onboarding process to help. If you have the stakeholder, they will have an active part of how to onboard their end users, but also during the onboarding process, setting up the expectations that throughout the relationship, there will be other areas as well, of course, where the customer can help themselves to become successful. So so we should start sharing playbooks with the customers as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. We highly encourage that, actually, that customers participate, and the organization can choose what aspects of the playbooks to share with the customer. They'll get they'll log in, they'll get to see the progress as well, and percentage complete. And nobody likes to see, hey, this is stuck because of me. So
well, it's as you say, it drives accountability, and I think that's really important, to drive accountability for the customer. We're not there to lay everything on a silver tray.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, so wonderful talking to you. I think great insights. So always a pleasure. Thank you so much, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. It's always a pleasure. And me too. Let's talk very soon, Prithwi.